We'd like to again thank Harriet Sternberg for sponsoring this next series. And I'm going to ask you, which of the following two scenarios that I'm about to describe, which of them is the more accurate depiction of today's society, in your opinion? You remember the 1987 movie Wall Street with Michael Douglas, and he won an Oscar for that portrayal of the stock market entrepreneur speculator Gordon, anybody remember his name? Gordon Gekko. And Gordon Gekko is relentless in his pursuit of wealth and willing to knock people down to succeed. And in a shareholders meeting of the Teldar Paper Company, he, planning to take it over, he proudly asserts what's become a well-known phrase. He asserts that greed is good. The second plot takes place in Massachusetts, Malden Mills Textile Factory. It was established in 1906. It had 3,100 employees. And in 1995, there was an explosion of the boiler and it was practically destroyed. The CEO, an Aaron Furstein, who was 70 at the time, now he's 95 or 96, had to make a decision. Was he going to take the $300 million from the insurance and close down? Or was he going to rebuild and pay his employees during the 2 years that it took to rebuild and also continue to give them their benefits? He made the decision and he kept every single one of his employees on and rebuilt. He was invited to the White House. He was honored by many and praised. And most of all, when he called together his employees after the destruction, they were in shock because they were sure that he would close it down. Why begin again? But that was not Aaron Furstein. So I'm going to ask you, which of those do you think depicts our society? Which of those characters? And it's never black or white, but what do you think? Remember, you have to unmute yourself if you want to say something. And I think I see, remember, I only see a few of you right now.
Okay, Bracha, it's Bev
Yeah.
here.
Yes.
I'm just going to say at this period in time, there are people who are doing both. There are, many restaurant owners who, have the wherewithal to be able to, give their employees and hang on to their employees and keep them employed. And then, of course, on the other side, there are others who are, out to make money and, who are scamming the government and taking all kinds of grants that may not be due to them just so that they can get money.
Yeah. I think ultimately that is the answer, but I'm just having us wondering how people feel, if you think one outweighs the other. Or do you agree with Bev that it's equally balanced? Anybody else?
Yes,
Stan.
Stan, yeah. I think we don't hear about the Fiersteins. Unfortunately, we only hear about the other grafters and people who are grabbing money from poor people and getting thrown into jail. But we don't hear enough about those other people, and they're out there. So I think the press gets a hold of this and makes a big deal about it. But a guy like Fierstein, well, you know, he's not going to sell us newspapers.
Yeah,
I think that's a major factor.
yeah, it's not sensational enough. I think somebody else wanted to.
I think that there are good people, but what we see, and I don't know if it's only the media, what we see is a lot of selfishness, people jumping the line to get shots when other people shouldn't, people taking advantage. And I don't know that it's only the media. I wonder if society is tilted towards people, the good, happy, positive stories. And I like to think of myself as an optimist, but I'm not very positive in this instance.
Okay, thanks. Somebody else?
It was me, Bracha. I really think that if you look at the world in general, I think the gecko principle still outweighs the Fierstein principle. And I think that as we look at the world today and we look at the economy and the way that certain companies and corporations have been raking in the dough and not really giving back what they should be giving back to the world in general, I'm very pessimistic.
Okay, so you've got to balance yourself out with Linda, who's usually an optimist. So, okay. So my next question is, what's behind the geckos of the world? Because that's the ill as opposed to the Fierstein. What's behind the geckos? In their book, Psychology and Consumer Culture, Alan Kanner and Tim Kasser ask, what leads people to care about and buy into materialistic behavior? In other words, what's behind people choosing MVO, which stands for materialistic value orientation, MVO. Anybody want to suggest what's behind it? What makes somebody? We'd like to say that we don't know anybody who's like Gecko, but on different levels, we probably do. Marlene?
I really think this is something that is nurture. It's definitely not nature. And unfortunately, we live in a world where people have been able to, through hard work in one generation, gain materialistically, and where the next generation, and certainly the one following after that, thinks that that's what the world revolves on. It's not who you are or what you are, it's what you have.
Yeah. Anybody want to add to that?
I'm just going to say that sometimes people who are lacking, they sometimes, once they've lacked and haven't had something, they sort of go overboard and become materialistic. And, you know,
Okay.
sometimes, you know, I just think it's, you know, it's a problem they have emotionally, that they need to strive and get more and more.
Yeah, putting together Marlene and Bev's comments, these two authors suggest that it's experiences that induce feelings they call feelings of insecurity. And it often causes individuals, as Bev just said, to seek strategies that will compensate for unsatisfied psychological needs. And it can be anything from dire poverty to constant warfare, political oppression, to a cold mother, punitive parents. It's interesting that they just referred to the mother, but then punitive parents. And so they have to find something to compensate for that. The second stimulus, they claim, is exposure, and this would go under the category of nurturing, not just at home, but society and advertising, that it's exposure to social models that encourage MVO, materialistic value orientation. And exactly, spend tomorrow, if you're not going anywhere, watching commercials. It does so much have to do with what you own as opposed to what you do. Now, they go on to say, well, how do these people turn out, MVOs? And of course, you can't always generalize, but when materialism is the central value, their personal sense of well-being declines. Externally, they might look, you know, right up there. But deep down, they usually have poor relationships. They lack trust. They're competitive as opposed to cooperative, and all things that sound very sensible. And not only that, what are they really achieving? Because they say they are so focused on obtaining rewards that they lose out on even experiencing any enjoyment or fun from what they're doing. Not a pretty picture, not a pretty picture. Now, the book concludes that a sense of well-being, as Marlene said, is nurtured when self-worth does not hinge on what you own. So what does our Masoret, our tradition, say about greed and material possessions? And those are two different things, but that's what we're going to be touching on. I need for me to be able to share the screen. It says it's disabled.
Bracha, oh, I don't know why, because you are I can make you the host. Hold on.
You know what?
No, hold on. It'll work. Just a moment.
Okay.
Try now.
Honor your parents. You should keep the Sabbath. You should honor God. This one is about things. You shouldn't want someone else's things.
Okay. All right. Anybody want to respond to that?
Hi, it's Sandy Galley. I've never done this actually before I hope nobody can see me because I'm cleaning my toilet. So, but it allows me to sort of look at things.
What's the expression TMI, too much information?
Oh, sorry. Well, no, I've done it, but I can do everything else.
That's okay. Just go on.
It's a
Go on.
mitzvah. So what I wanted to say was, to me, like, I'm looking at, I can like disassociate a bit. And I think that what we're looking at here is that you should not covet what somebody else has. Not that you should want the object, but you shouldn't put yourself in relation to other people. And that's not like what you shouldn't do. But the fact is that don't compare yourself. And as soon as you start to compare yourself, it makes you want more. If you're just thinking about it, do I really want that ox? It's another story than to say, do I want my neighbor's ox? And it just brings to me another perspective that I
Okay.
might not have noticed if I had been.
No. I want to say two things to you. Thank you for your important comment. And the next is a request. Please mute yourself when you flush. Okay.
Oh, no,
Now,
I'm not. I hope no.
All right.
I'm out there. I've done that.
You don't know my humor. Okay. Now,
Oh, sorry.
what you said is very true. That it's not saying you can't want something, not at all. It's here specifically saying don't want something specific that belongs to somebody else. Yes, but still two good answers, but no one has said where I'm going to. How still is this different from all the others? Go ahead.
Bracha?
Go ahead.
Bracha, I think this one is something that's inward and it's part of your mindset, whereas the others were actions. And this is something that you would be kept inside of you and would really determine how you feel about yourself, whereas the others were direct actions. You shall not steal, you shall not murder. And this one is something that could go on and nudge, as they say, nudge you and keep nudging and nudging and nudging at you.
Okay, thank you, Marlene. Yes, I heard a male voice also wanting to say something.
Yeah, Mike Bernstein. I was going to say,
Michael, how are you, Michael?
very good. I was
Good.
going to say basically the same thing, that this is coveting is something that's in your mind. Nobody can see you covet. Everything else they can see, but this is something that goes on in a person's mind. So how do you can't even see it. Only God could see it, if that's possible.
Exactly.
So I think that's the difference.
Exactly. That here, you're not necessarily acting on something. It's a feeling, it's a thought that, yes, is internal. So the next question could be, can a person actually be commanded not to want something if it's just inside? Something that he or she, their heart desires? How do you control that? And how do you even dictate that you can't forget about acting upon the desire, but how can you control a thought or a feeling? And what's wrong with that? So let's look, and there'll be a couple of other questions about this. Let's look at text number 2. This is taken from the Tanakh, Kings 1. And it came to pass after these things that Navot, the Israeli, had a vineyard, talking about wine, Doris, which was in Yisrael near the palace of Achav, the king that was married to Jezebel, king of Shomron. And Achav spoke to Navot, saying, give me your vineyard, that I may have it for a vegetable garden, because it is near to my house, and I will give you for it a better vineyard than it, or if it seemed good to you, I will give you its worth in money. And Navot said to Achav, the Lord forbid me that I should give you the inheritance of my fathers. And Achav came into his house, sullen and displeased because of the word which Navot, the Israel, had spoken to him, for he had said, I will not give you the inheritance of my fathers. And he laid himself down upon his bed and turned away his face and would not eat bread. Now, is there anything wrong in those verses, in what we've read just now? Do you find anything that should be considered a sin? Anybody?
Yes, I do.
Go ahead.
He had no business feeling so bad that he was turned down that he refused to eat. I mean, he should,
Why?
because
You
he should
haven't
not.
ever wanted something really strongly and you don't get it and then you lose your appetite?
It was an inheritance of Ahav's father. So it's very important to him that he keep that vineyard. And the other fellow should understand that and accept it.
Okay. Now, there really isn't anything that thus far has gone on that you would consider a sin. He doesn't just take it, right? He offers to give him either another vineyard or to compensate him monetarily. Well, if you were to take the Tanakh and read the next several verses, you would see that Jezebel comes in and it all goes downhill from there. It degenerates to false testimony. She calls together some people and presents the case, and it turns into lies and blaming Navot. It leads to bloodshed and Navot being murdered and the theft of the vineyard. And ultimately, Eliyahu has a prophecy that the family of Ahab, is going to see downfall. So I purposely didn't bring you how it ends, but what's the point of that? That here, the fact that Ahab wanted so desperately to buy or to give or get this vineyard that he does go home and is so upset, and he doesn't appreciate the fact that it was an inheritance, but he wants that particular one. And he could have had anyone that he wants, approached other people who maybe it wasn't an inheritance. But he does go home and he is so upset. And then his wife leads them down the wrong path. And that's what can happen with the feeling. That's when it's a problem. If it leads to an action that's wrong. Let's look at this a little more by looking at this excerpt from Talmud. Text number 3. And pay very close attention to the little details, please. A certain man once set his eyes upon the wife of his master, he being a carpenter's apprentice. Once his master needed to borrow money from him. Interesting. He said to him, send your wife to me and I will give the money to her. He sent his wife to him and he spent 3 days with her, or you might want to say she spent 3 days with him. The carpenter went to him and said, my wife who I sent to you, where is she? He answered, the apprentice, I sent her away at once, but I heard that the youngsters assaulted her on the way. The carpenter said, well, what should I do? He replied, if you want my advice, divorce her. He said, but her ketubah is high. He answered, I will lend you the money so you can give her what you owe her according to her marriage certificate. So the carpenter went and divorced her, and the apprentice went and married her. When the time for payment came and he was unable to pay him, the apprentice said to him, come and work off your debt with me. Are you picturing this? So they, the three of them, would sit and eat and drink while he waited upon them, and the tears would fall from his eyes into their cups. And at that time, the verdict was sealed. What's the verdict? They claimed that this was reason enough for the ruin of Yerushalayim at the end of the Second Temple period. Now, who do you dislike or most critical of in this story? We have three characters. We have the master. Did he do anything that you find upsetting? We have his wife. Did she do anything or did she not do anything? And of course, the apprentice. Anybody?
I just think the apprentice is the nastiest because he seemed to have a plan in mind as how this would work out.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I think
You
the
see-
wife also, I think the wife also plays a role in this.
How?
Because she could have said, I'm going back to my husband. I'm not going to acquiesce to this. And she had free will to make her own decision. Although I
Okay.
agree that I think the apprentice is scoundrel.
I think they're all wrong.
Okay, go ahead, Fagel. So why do you think the
I
master?
think they're all guilty. Nor they definitely, the husband and wife didn't have a good relationship, and the apprentice liked her. Obviously, it's a story of today. Everybody's out for themselves, and she was ready to go from one guy to another guy.
Now, we don't know the details of why. We don't know whether the husband had it coming to him and she was relieved to be able to go. But you also have a sense, well, why did the husband send her to begin with? Or was he so confident that nothing would go on? But then the way it ends, why is he crying at the end? It's really, you feel sorry. Probably, I think I feel the most sorry for the husband, the master. But all of this has to do with the first comment that Bev said, that the first line of this text is that the apprentice set his eyes on the woman who was a wife, not only that, a wife of his boss, his teacher, and then he let that control. He put into action. He acted on his feelings. And again, that's the problem.
Bracha,
Go ahead.
I look upon the carpenter as really being very innocent and naive. And I mean, I think basically he went into this arrangement with the apprentice in good faith. He needed money and he felt he could turn to him. The apprentice reminds me more of the Gecko character. He was looking for a power play and he saw his opportunity to get what he wanted and get it from somebody who actually at that point in time had more power than he did. So he turned the tables on him, and the poor man at the end of it, here he becomes in a subservient position, and he's very upset that he's now lost his wife, probably lost his money, and he's been denigrated as far as his position is concerned.
All of that, all of that.
However, the
And-
carpenter was the boss. You would think that he would have more money than his apprentice.
I know
So
that's what
something
I
is
said,
wrong with
Simone, at the
that.
beginning. But maybe it was that he just didn't have cash flow at the time.
Okay.
I just watched a movie that phrase was there. That's the only reason I'm suggesting, have that on my mind.
Bracha, I have
Um,
another problem with this.
Go ahead.
Carpenter sends his wife, all right? And then when he asked the apprentice, it's been 3 days, and he said, well, I sent her right away. What happened? I heard youngsters assaulted her. So what should I do? Divorce her? What the hell are you? This is your wife. She was assaulted and you're going to divorce her? Like, what kind of an idiot is this man?
Whoa, Michael.
I mean, it's like, it's like crazy. So I have no sympathy for him. I mean, I know he was undone by the other guy, but like, first of all, he shouldn't have sent his wife in the first place. In those days, wives, they stayed at home because they didn't know
Yes.
worldly things. But the fact that she may have been assaulted, so first of all, he doesn't check it out, but even if she had been, you divorce her because of that? Like,
Well,
that's
it
crazy.
goes, I agree. It goes to show, I think somebody said it earlier, that they probably did not have the best of relationships because he's immediately accepting the apprentices because the apprentice lies. She had been with him for 3 days and he says, I sent her off immediately. So that's this lust leads to, now, they might all be guilty, but the point of the story is how it begins with this feeling, and if you don't control it, it's going to ripple into a variety of evils. Yes. Now, let's look at the third question I had asked with text 4, 5, and 6. I had asked, so how do you command a feeling? And can somebody control a feeling that is so overwhelming? So let's look at the first commentator, Ibn Ezra, and see what he says. Now, I shall present a parable. He's commenting about this commandment. Know that a peasant who is of sound mind and who sees a princess who is beautiful will not covet her in his heart to lie with her, for he knows that it is impossible. Let's remember when this was written, there was such a thing as classes, distinct classes, and you couldn't literally dream of a possibility. Do not consider this peasant to be like a madman who would desire wings to fly to heaven, even though it is impossible. Likewise, a person does not desire to lie with his mother, although she may be beautiful, for he has been accustomed since his youth to know that she is forbidden to him. In the same way, an intelligent person must know that he will want beautiful woman or wealth as a result of his wisdom or knowledge, but only if God allots it to him. What he's saying is, there's no way that somebody who's been taught and nurtured would even dream of the possibility of wanting something that God has not given him. And therefore, an intelligent person does not desire it or covet it. When he knows that God has forbidden his neighbor's wife to him, then she is more elevated in his eyes than the princess in the eyes of the peasant. And so he is satisfied with his portion and does not allow his heart to covet and desire something that is not his. For he knows that God does not wish to give it to him. He cannot take it by force or by his thoughts or schemes. He has faith in his creator that he will provide for him and do what is good in his eyes. So according to Ibn Ezra, what should the apprentice, if he was a God-fearing person, what should he have been able to do?
Tame his lust.
He would have been able to, because he would have grown up in a certain way, and it would have been part of his lifestyle. God didn't give me this. Ibn Ezra says that'll be enough for somebody to control even these lustful feelings. Now, 19th century, Rav Yaakov Mecklenburg says something a little different, and you tell me how it is different. Why did the Torah state, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart? Would it not have been sufficient to write simply, you shall love the Lord with your heart? He's attaching this to this commandment. The verse signifies that your heart should be completely full of love for God. Picture a cup and it's filled to the brim. There's no room for anything else. That's what Mecklenburg is saying. It will be impossible for him to covet any of the desirable things of this world which meet his gaze, since his heart is continually preoccupied with joyous love of God. So what is Mecklenburg saying that's a little different than Ibn Ezra? What's going to control a person's feelings? Not just that he's been commanded, that's not necessarily going to do it, but what will keep him?
His faith, his love of God.
His love of God. Okay, let's forget everything that we talked about last week with putting God second, okay? But his love of God in this case. Now, is that really going to do it? Is that a law telling you, well, it's not yours, so okay, I'm not going after it? If you really have this genuine desire, even love of God, is that? Maybe yes, maybe no. The third text. Sorry? The third text from the 13th century Sefer that I brought here before, written anonymously for his son, commentator explaining, giving ethical reasoning behind each of the 613 mitzvot. He says the following: do not wonder and ask, but how can it be in one's power to restrain his heart from longing for riches that he may see in his fellow man's possession when he himself is lacking them all? It's a natural desire. How can a prohibition be given in the Torah about something which man cannot possibly obey? It's a feeling. This matter is not so. None but wicked fools and sinners would speak so. For it is indeed in one's power to restrain himself, his thoughts and his longings from whatever he wishes. Why? It lies within his free choice and his decision to repel his desire or draw it near with regard to all matters as he wishes. He rules his heart and can guide it as he wants. So what is the element that is going to restrain the lustful person? You can't blame it on strong desire. Each of us has free choice. And if you know that, you are going to be in control and not a feeling. What do you think of these three thinkers and what they're suggesting? Are they off? Are they realistic?
I think it's important, to look at the Sefer HaChinuch, because, sometimes we don't think we have control. And we have to remember that we do have control and that we have a responsibility, that if we don't have that control, that we have to work on it and make sure that we don't do what we're not supposed to do.
It's called resist temptation.
Yeah,
Bracha,
go ahead.
what about something that we are taught from the time that we are children about the Yetzer Hara and what you have to do to overcome it? Isn't that something that's ingrained in your psyche from the time you're a little child?
Well, that's what Ibn Ezra is suggesting, and
That's what
probably even Mecklenburg. And I would say even Sefer HaChinuch, when he's talking about other mitzvot, that this is all dependent on how you've been brought up. That it's going to be so internalized that you aren't going to allow yourself to even feel or want something that isn't yours. And there are those who feel that that does suffice. And then there are others who say, well, lust is blind. But it certainly reflects these thinkers as being central to our tradition, that it certainly creates an environment that is making it clear that, as Fagel said before, you don't just go from one to the other, and you don't just feel that you can say, I'm taking your vineyard. It might be very difficult to control feelings, but at least it's not going to hurt to have the nurturing. And the nurturing isn't just sitting your kids down and telling them A, B, and C, but they'll see it in your behaviors. Okay, now, so we begin with lo tachmod, not to covet. But what about, in general, our tradition's attitude toward things and possessions? Because it doesn't always involve lust. There's nothing wrong, as someone said earlier. It's definitely wrong when you're really considering and then you act upon taking something that belongs to somebody else. But what in general is our attitude towards physical, material objects? Is there anywhere in our tradition that says one should not own things? No. Now, looking in Sefer Shemot, there's a very interesting source that's going to be this suggestion that I'm going to put forward about our attitude towards material things. There are many sources, but this is the one I want us to look at first. In text 7, and you shall make boards for the tabernacle of shittim wood. Now you're sitting there and you're wondering, what does this have to do with covenant? Well, you'll remember in the desert, in the Midbar, the Israelites are meant to construct the tabernacle, the Mishkan. And this is one of the instructions. You're making the boards from shittim wood. Now look what it says. According to the Talmud, the shita was a type of cedar. Hasidic teaching sees the word shittim as related to the word shtut, folly. Okay, follow this. In allusion to the fact that the function of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, was to transform the folly of materialism into folly of holiness, commitment to God that transcends the rationale and normalcy of the way things are. It's a play on words, as we often see, but our attitude is that we take the most mundane of items and we give it a sense of holiness. Now, if you were to look in Shemot, you would see that there are 13 chapters devoted to describing the construction of this tabernacle. The 15 materials that are used are mentioned 3 times. The different components mentioned 8 times. All the details, the colors, the dimensions, at least 2 times. Versus the story of creation has 1 chapter. Mount Sinai has 3 chapters. The Exodus has 11 chapters. But the construction of the tabernacle, 13 chapters. Why? Why is so much time devoted to this act? And it has to do with our attitude towards what we do with material items. The sanctuary in text number 8 is the model and prototype for all subsequent homes for God constructed on physical earth. So the overwhelming emphasis on its construction stage, as opposed to the implementation stage, implies that in our lives too, there is something very special about forging our personal resources into things that have the potential to serve God, making ourselves vessels for goodliness is, in a certain sense, a greater feat than actually bringing godliness into our lives. The process, for this is where the true point of transformation lies. The transformation from a self-oriented object to a thing committed to something greater than itself. If God had merely desired a hospitable environment, he need not have bothered with the material world. A spiritual world could just as easily have been enlisted to serve him. What God desired was the transformation itself, the challenge and achievement of selfhood transcended and materiality redefined. If we want to borrow a word from last week, it's the aspiration of getting higher. That's what's important, not the end product, but taking these objects. This transformation and redefinition occurs in the first stage when something material is forged into an instrument of the divine. Now, would anybody like to give us an example of an object, a material object that you have taken, and to use the words of this, enlisted in the service of God? Anybody? Can't hear you?
Beautiful candlesticks. I mean, that's a material object that's just sitting
Yes,
in.
exactly. You take beautiful candlesticks. That's called hidur mitzvah. You're taking something material, not because it might be expensive, but you're using it to show God you want this to be special. Somebody else said something.
You know, Bracha, may I? Bracha,
Go on, Merle.
I would just like to say that your mother was the a perfect example of this, I think, anyways.
I unshared because, Merle, If nobody had said anything, I was going to say, I'm going to start. So as long as you brought that up, I have a choice now to let you say it or me say it, but I'm going to say it first. If you want to add. That is the first example that I thought of. And I'm going to say three things. I remember the first yurt site, my mother's first yurt site. It's on Tu B'Shvat, the Rosh Chodesh Shvat. And so we had, some of us, a Seder, Tu B'Shvat. And I remember going to buy items for the Seder. And I'm standing there having to make a choice between ordinary dates and, of course, the huge, juicy dates. And of course, I had to buy the huge, juicy, expensive dates. She didn't buy it because they were expensive, but that is enhancing the mitzvah. And yes, when she would set the Shabbat table or the table for a Chag, Yontif, that was all about Hidur mitzvah. And the third example, Simone, you here?
Listening.
So I'm sure you'll remember this. Simone, about, I think 3 months before my mother actually left this world physically, she was already in a wheelchair. And Simone and I, it was before Rosh Hashanah, took her to, do you remember the store, Simone? Frumala's. Frumala's. And if you can picture that, how narrow it was, and we wheeled her into that small store. She wanted to buy something new. Again, not because the material new dress she needed to show off, but it was her way of not just Hidur mitzvah, but Ratzon l'chyot, desire to live. And so we take material items and we can dedicate it to something holy. You take the dollar bill and instead of putting it in your pocket, you give it tzedakah. Merle, you want to add something?
I'm going to cry.
That's okay.
Yeah. Actually, I think that I spent a lot of time with your mother when we lived in Israel, and I think she showed me this all the time, whether it was, in the early 80s, like, food, where to buy the best fish or the best meat or the best whatever. But just, she often said like that beautiful things were just an enhancement for living a holy life in a way. And she taught me a lot about that.
Bracha.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I'll share a story also. Marvin's mother.
Yeah.
She sewed, but her life truly was like the story of something from nothing. Because of being poor, everything had a second life. After Marvin's parents passed away and we went into the condo, we found a big bag of the fabric. And our daughter Bev took these pieces of fabric and she sewed them together and she created her chuppah. And to me, that also was taking something which was so ordinary and then elevating it. And the wedding was outside, and watching the wind catch this chuppah and like blowing up, it was quite a moment. So that's what I feel.
Beautiful. Anyone else? Don't hesitate. These are wonderful stories. Okay, we're going to conclude with two texts that offer suggestion for how we deal with subverting Hidur Mitzvah to materialism. And interesting, a couple of months ago already, in discussing our first ill and then the second ill, both thinkers brought up Shabbat as a solution. Well, we're going to hear about Shabbat again from these two people. First, Avram Yoshua Heschel. Text 9. Most of us succumb to the magnetic property of things and evaluate events by their tangible results. We appreciate things that are displayed in the realm of space. The truth, however, is that the genuinely precious is encountered in the realm of time rather than in space. We know that passion cannot be vanquished by decree. The 10th injection would, therefore, be practically futile were it not for the commandment regarding the Sabbath day. We must seek to find a relation between the two commandments. Do not covet anything belonging to your neighbor. I have given you something that belongs to me. What is that something? A day. Judaism tries to foster the vision of life as a pilgrimage to the seventh day, the longing for the Shabbat all the days of the week, which is a form of longing for the eternal Shabbat all the days of our lives. It seeks to displace the coveting of things in space for coveting the things in time. I need not take away from the poetry of that in explaining anything, but our little Hebrew for today. So, lo tachmod, do not covet. So you see the shorish, the root is chet mem daled. The coveted day of Shabbat is often referred to as chemdat yamim, from the same shorish. Beautiful, the Hebrew, what we do with the shorish. And now let's conclude. We don't stay on the spiritual or the theoretical, but as Jonathan Sachs at Chrono Bracha teaches us, it's fascinating. If you look in the Torah to see the command that Moshe issues immediately before the golden calf, and then immediately after the golden calf. And the fascinating thing is it's the same command. What is the command? Shabbat, the Sabbath. Why is the Sabbath the antidote to the golden calf? It's obvious. On Shabbos, you can't buy, you can't sell, you can't go into work, and you make money. You can't. On Shabbos, you focus on the things that have value but no price. You focus on home, on your husband or wife, on your children. You spend time together as a family. You spend time together in the synagogue as a community. You learn a little, you pray a little, you thank God for what you have instead of worrying about what you don't have. Shabbos is the day
It's Elise, I'm coming down.
when we focus on the value of things and ignore completely the price of things. And that is why Shabbat is the antidote to the golden calf. I think it at incredible moments of financial insanity, keeping Shabbos is the best way for all of us to stay sane. And that is why Shabbat is the antidote to the golden calf. I think it at credible moments of financial insanity, keeping Shabbos is the best way for all of us to stay sane. So let's give a lot of thought to Shabbat, since it's been suggested as the solution for many things in whichever way. So, anybody want to add anything?
I'm
Bracha, Bracha.
Stan, then Bev.
Yes, this could come under the heading of reverse materialism in some way. In the newspaper, in the Post about a few weeks ago, in the home section, there was a big feature about a big development going on at Bayview and Shepherd. Big condos, fancy condos, even with granite countertops in the kitchen. and they listed some of the amenities of the neighborhood. They said there was about 3 things they mentioned: nice shopping area, beautiful restaurants, and Beth Tikva synagogue up the street where there's music and there's interesting Jewish activity and prayer. Interesting.
Who's responsible for that?
I
Doris?
don't know. I don't, it was written up as a commercial for the condo development, big picture of the buildings. And I just thought I'd throw that in. That
Wow.
whether they're using that as an advertisement for people to move in, whether they'll attend Beth Tikva or not is another story. But it's interesting. We have a reputation, and it's a positive. I thought that was a positive thing in a materialistic ad.
Absolutely. So they have a choice now. Beth Tikva, or what's the name? People's Church, right down
Yes,
there?
right.
Yeah?
They didn't mention the church at all, just Beth Tikva.
Okay. Somebody else wanted to say something.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
We sort of slowly became observant over the years. And we used to go to the synagogue in the morning, and then in the afternoon, we used to go shopping. And it became
Shabbat
crazy.
you're talking about.
Yes, on Shabbat. We'd go to synagogue on Shabbat morning and then go crazy and shopping in the afternoon. And we kind of looked at each other at some point and said, this is crazy. And we started to become more observant and, just slowly take it easy and, stop shopping on Shabbat and then stopping with the electricity and, and just becoming Shomrei Shabbat slowly.
Thank you. Yep, process. And having seen Bev and her husband's hobbies, they collect things. And I'm pointing that out because, again, I want to emphasize that this in no way is indicating that we don't support having things that are interesting, entertaining, and it all adds up to a certain lifestyle and things that you cherish doing, and it gives you pleasure. Anybody else?
Coming back, that what you're talking about, especially with what it relates to a certain lifestyle, I'm thinking just at the end of this, that there's something positive going on with the next generation, at least the way I see it, even for my own grandchildren, that they don't want all the material things anymore, that it's not the money that's important. They have a different balance in life. And I forget which generation it is, if it's Z or whatever, but they're not the materialistic things that that their goals are different from the previous generations. They want more balance. The way even a lot of them go shopping in Value Village or what just different. And it's not, I thought, oh, it's because you grew up and you had more and you're coming back and this is cool. But no, they think everything, they're just re-identifying themselves and thinking about the values and looking at what was wrong in the previous generations. And I think it's quite hopeful. I really do. And I think it's just based, I don't even think they quite realize if you actually took out what your texts were today and say, here, what do you think of all these? And I wonder what they would say, because they're not looking at it with the same, they're not necessarily balancing, they've already made up their mind. And this is not what they want. They're looking, it's just an idealism that I see coming.
That's heartwarming to hear.
Yeah.
I would say amen to that and let it be. Let it be.
Makes me happy, yeah. Sorry.
Good. Anybody else? Okay. Etta, is your cake finished? We're all invited to take a taste. Okay.
Anytime.
Anytime. Yeah, may that be. Okay. Have a good week.
Yeah, good class, Bracha, very good.
Okay.
Thank
And
you very much, Bracha.
don't fall on the snow and the ice, please.
And it's gone. For the most
It's
part,
gone.
It's gone.
It's
Yeah.
all
Thanks, Bracha.
melted.
Well
It's all
done.
melted now.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Esther
You know,
Koa,
I didn't even know
Sullivan.
your mother, but just listening to Merle's story, I was never a Beth Tikva, we never joined Beth Tikva, but I know quite a few people there, but just listening to Merle crying, I was crying. So it's very powerful when you can hear, an inspiration. You say, gee, it's like, it's not just, but she inspires. And when, people are inspirational, it's just, it adds to the whole mixture. Like you shouldn't just want, looking back at it, that you shouldn't want what somebody else has. You should want to be like somebody else.
She was a very special woman, and her daughter is a chip off the old block.
There's a
Thank you,
combination
Sarah.
of both of them.
She was special, and you just brought to my mind another image. Linda, I'm about to embarrass you. So that last Rosh Hashanah, as I said, my mother was in a wheelchair. And so she's sitting at the end of the row. I think we were like 2 rows behind my father, who's standing and standing and standing. And Linda comes over. And actually, my mother had the wheelchair was there, but she
was sitting
sat in a
chair.
regular chair.
Yeah.
Linda comes over and proceeds to sit in that wheelchair. Now, you remember that?
Nobody
Now,
can hear
that's
what you're
not why
doing.
I'm telling the story. If you're talking about inspiring, there was only one time that my mother was able to, and maybe she really wasn't able to, but she did, that she stood. Muhammad, do you remember when she stood that whole service? When they said the prayer for the Israeli soldiers. She forced herself to get up. So talk about inspiring. I'm sorry. My father would be yelling at me now because I'm making it too personal, but I think it's good for us to share these kinds of things. And that's what
I
came to
agree,
mind.
totally agree.
Okay.
Well,
We
All
were a
right.
group.